briefing. This afternoon, you'll hear a few remarks from our panel, who will then take a few questions. On the panel today, we have His Excellency Gustavo Meza Cuadra Velasquez, who is the chair of the INC. We have Ms. Inge Anderson, who is the executive director of the UN Environment Program. And we have Ms. Jyoti Mather-Philip, who is the executive secretary of the INC. So before we get to our speakers, I'll just go over a couple of housekeeping guidelines. We have 30 minutes available, as I said, and we hope to use about half of that for questions. For media with questions, once I call on you, please let me know your name and the name of the media outlet you represent. Without further ado, therefore, I'll ask the chair of the INC, Mr. Gustavo Meza Cuadra Velasquez, to make a few remarks.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Executive Director General of UNEP, Executive Director. I am really honored to be with you and at this first day of the sessions of the INC-3. This has been a very important week, starting on Saturday with the preparatory meeting, and today the starting of the INC-3 itself. I think we are entering a very important phase of our negotiations. As you know, we have now a zero draft, was prepared by the chair with the support of the secretariat, and this is going to be discussed in this session. It is important that for the first time we enter in discussion with a text, and also we plan to have also more focused discussions later on contact groups. The idea is to revise all the issues we have already presented in this text. That includes, as was mandated, the whole life cycle of plastics. Also, we will have the opportunity to continue discussing the issues that were not discussed in Paris and in Punta del Este in the first and second INC. So this is an opportunity to completely discuss all the issues that we need to be discussing for having a text. As you know, the mandate is for having a text at the end of 2024. I hope that the spirit of Nairobi, which was here where we adopted the resolution, UNEA 514, which started this whole process, will help us to find ways to find common solutions to this urgent problem of plastic pollution. We are very pleased of the message this morning of the President of the Kenya that strongly support the work that we are doing here at the INC and committed their country and the region support for this successful end of the mandate we have, as I mentioned, in 2024, with a text for a legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution. So with that, I thank you very much, and I'm very open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Our next speaker will be Ms. Inge Anderson, who is the Executive Director of UNEP.
Thank you very much. And to members of the press, welcome. We are obviously very happy that the press is covering these negotiations. They're absolutely critical. We are at the third INC, and we are here this week because nations have decided that we need to find a solution to plastic pollution, and we understood that it poses a major threat to environment as well as to people. And nations promised back in 2022 to do something about it. Right now, as you heard His Excellency President Ruto say in the opening, we produce about 430 million tons a year, and only 10% of that is recycled. 74% ends up in landfills, and from there it goes into the environment, or it already goes straight into the environment. So we have to take action. We also understand that there are chemicals associated with these plastics, many of them harmful. And we also, of course, understand that when we end up burning plastic, we are causing significant climate impact. So that's why 18 months ago here in this beautiful compound of the United Nations at Nairobi, member states took the decision to start this process with the resolutions on plastic. Now, I want to emphasize, as I did in my opening speech in the plenary, that the life cycle element is crucial. This instrument is not about recycling and improving recycling. This instrument is not just about waste management or cleanups. It is about a complete rethink on how we use plastics. We need fewer virgin materials. We need to reduce the unnecessary and eliminate the unnecessary, those mindless plastics that we just use for 5 minutes, but 500 years in the landfill kind of plastics. We need to rethink completely, and we need to not have harmful chemicals in that which remains. And obviously, we need to think about getting plastic out of nature, reduce the climate impact, and about that which we speak to, a just transition. Just transition that includes decent jobs for those today who work in the plastics industry, decent jobs and opportunities for waste pickers and for the communities impacting. Now, we have to account for national circumstances. I think we all understand that. And there are different capabilities, and that's part of the negotiations for sure, to have an understanding of those differences and provide. So we have to find support, financial support to provide for those that need it. And of course, we encourage industry already now to lean in on this and to be part of this change, to lead the change, to innovate, and to rethink and imagine what other products could be like. But we also need to incentivize industry innovation and especially on non-plastic substitutes and alternatives for better use of plastic. These are some of the instruments and the levers that negotiators have at their hands and at their disposal to think about in the context of the negotiations. Now, this third round that we just heard from the chair, we're really looking to hear voices, hear negotiators on the zero draft, to advance that, and to hand a mandate to the chair at the end of this session so that the chair can come back with the next iteration by the time we meet in Ottawa in April, which will just around the corner in April 2024. Now, when this resolution was passed last year in 2022, we hailed it as a triumph of this Nairobi spirit. And I have every confidence that that spirit of cooperation, the spirit of consensus, the spirit of ambition will continue to be held by the negotiators, because we need to see that spirit over the next days with your good leadership, Chair, so that we can hone in on an instrument that will carve out a future that is free of plastic pollution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Executive Director. And our last speaker on the panel this afternoon is Ms. Jyoti Mather-Philip, who is the Executive Secretary of the INC. Over to you, Jyoti.
Thank you, Keisha. As often happens when you are the last, what you want to say is already said. So I'm not going to add a lot. I'm just going to say that on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution, we are very grateful to the Government of Kenya for hosting this third session. We also deeply appreciate His Excellency the President's impactful remarks, as has already been said this morning. And finally, I do want to say that it was that the Nairobi spirit that brought us the resolution last year, as has already been said also, must also be in full force now so that we can move ahead. INC-3 is very, very critical. It's the midpoint of our 5 INCs, and so it has to it plays a very important part in taking this whole process forward. We had a preparatory meeting on Saturday, which gave a very positive signal, was very constructive, and it has allowed us today to make a lot of progress. We have finished mostly all of our procedural agenda items, and we are now fully into discussing substance, and we hope that we can continue to do this very constructively and with good exchange of ideas in the coming week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will move on to the Q&A portion of the briefing. As I mentioned before, please state your name and the outlet you represent when you ask a question. We should have some mics roving. Feel free to, stick your hand up if you have a question. Go ahead. Matt Moses.
Should I wait for the mic?
Yes, please.
Because we're streaming.
Hi, I'm Steve Tolikin with Plastics News magazine. My question is process and substance. We lost 2 days in Paris because there were substantial differences countries expressed about the direction of the treaty. It seems like those differences are still existing, but they haven't gummed up the works like they did in Paris. Are we sort of papering those over now, or do you feel that any substantial progress has been made on those differences? Can you offer your comments on that?
Maybe I'll ask the chair to.
Thank you for that question. Yes, we had a difficult start in Paris, but we don't see that as a loss of time. Really, countries need to be heard, need to present their views, and sometimes some countries needs to find be heard and find compromises. No, that was the case in Paris. No, we find a compromise in a particular issue, which was the rules of procedure that always are very important for a negotiation. We are here also following that decision, no, because it's basically we are working on a provisional basis with these rules, with this interpretative statement that was adopted after these 2 days. We are prepared for these time discussions. I think always there can be issues of procedural issues, but we hope, and it's our desire, to go as soon as possible to substantive discussion. Now we are following our plan. The agenda of this morning was as planned. We hope that we will continue with national statements this afternoon, and hopefully we can go, as I mentioned at the beginning, with more focused discussion in contact groups. This is our side. We hope that it will be accepted and go as planned in order to have a successful INC-3 where we enter really in discussions, as I mentioned, as having the zero draft as a starting point. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Blessed Suga. I work with Joy News, a multimedia station in Accra. Just to pick up on the comments by Ms. Anderson, you called for a complete rethink. What's the remit of that? Is that extending to, for instance, calls that have been made that for instance, countries should outlaw single-use plastics? To what extent are you going to rethink about this process?
You know, in all my conversations also with industry, I'm encouraging them to rethink. And it's very interesting that much of industry is in fact trying to do that rethink. Does the product have to be liquid? If it has to be liquid, can it be more concentrated? Are there alternatives to it being liquid? If it is dry or powdered, can it be delivered without that plastic? Does the product have to be enveloped in 3 layers of the same thing? These are the questions that are simple to ask, and that's part of a rethink. Does it have to be plastic? Are there other, through R&D, through research and development, substitutes? And we know that there are. And so essentially on the rethink side, the industry has a huge role to play. But we also know, as UNEP, from, for example, the Montreal Protocol negotiations, where in the late 70s we discovered that there was a hole in the ozone layer. And we found that what was causing that were the chemicals that we use for refrigeration and air conditioning. Now, at the time, industry told us that it was impossible. Some industries told us that it was impossible to find chemical replacements. But the world decided, nevertheless, that it was not a good thing to have a hole in the ozone layer, and therefore said that these things shall be outlawed or shall be exited, with support and financial support to those who needed it. And guess what? Today your refrigerator still cools, but it uses different chemicals. So I think that's part of the sort of modus of rethink that we want to inculcate with everyone, that there is this understanding. Now, how does that then get reflected into a treaty text is now for member states to think through. And there are different on-ramps to that. Some have called for reduction in overall polymer production. Some have called for taxes and incentives to incentivize away from virgin polymer into recycled polymer. Some have called for alternative materials. Some have called for exit of certain hazardous chemicals. All of these are on the table right now in these negotiations. And I think we from UNEP side, we are long in the tooth in environmental, multilateral environmentalism, and we know that having this broad discussion under the leadership of member states, but with everyone under the big tent, is the way that we arrive at sustainable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one over there. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Pedro Alonso. I work for the Spanish News Wire FA here in Nairobi. I have a couple of questions for the chairman. The first one is what outcome this week in Nairobi will make this meeting a success, in your opinion? And my second question is, how realistic is to think that this treaty can be achieved in 2024? I mean, time is really running out already. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we mentioned in the scenario note we distributed before the meeting, what we are aiming at is the main goal would be to have a clear mandate for the next chair to prepare a revised text, an iteration of a text we have right now, in order to move forward. As you mentioned, we have a short target limit we are planning. The mandate gives us up to the end of 2024. So it's challenging. We have 2 more INCs, but it's feasible. We think it's possible. That's the reason we are working very hard to have this successful INC-3. Also, as an important outcome will be to have a very structured or well-defined intersessional work, because it's important in this stage of the process to have the scientific community and with the experts from governments working in more specific issues that are required to progress in the text. So these 2 will be the main outcomes of this conference that we expected.
Thank you, Chair. Any more for any more? All right, we have one at the back.
Well, thank you. My name is Minslet from Radio France International Kiswahili Service. Some of the biggest players we are looking at are the private sector and the producers. What has been the level of engagement so far since the second session in Paris?
Yes,
Can you say the last sentence again?
The progress since the second session in Paris.
Yeah, what has been the level of engagement with the private sector and the producers since the second session in Paris?
So, of course, the Secretariat, under the leadership of Mrs. Mato-Philip, listens to all sides, but does not have specific engagement with one sector or another. I think is fair. From UNEP's side, we have been certainly engaging similarly with all sides, and listening, doing a lot of listening, understanding. For example, on the sidelines of the General Assembly in New York, there were quite a lot of meetings that I had the opportunities to have, and precisely to hear from industry sides as well as from civil society side, what was the thinking. The interesting part is that a large slice of industry, what they're asking for is a level playing field. What they're asking for is predictability. What they're asking for is knowing what the market will be like 5 years, 10 years out, so that they can plan. What they don't want is an unlevel playing field where they can't compete. And what they don't want is that this treaty instrument could become a barrier for trade, but they also want it. This is what I'm hearing from industry, which is your question, that they're looking for a level playing field and market predictability. So I think that's fair, because if you are in the business of innovating, you need to know where you're going and what might be the routes you may wish to take. Many of the CEOs with whom I have engaged, since your question is on private sector, are very much aware that yes, there are different interests, and yes, it is difficult, but are also wanting to be leaders and aware that their market value may not go up by their product empty emballage, what's called packaging, be floating about in the environment. Workers' pride may not be going up if their product packaging is in the open environment. So I think workers' pride and shareholder pride and value are also part and parcel of a conversation that I think I'm understanding is happening, because if the company leans in and not greenwashing, I have to insist, of course, but genuinely makes some of these shifts, it's our belief that it's not only good for economies, it's good for jobs, it's good for opportunities, and that indeed there are alternatives. So we're very much looking forward to hearing those voices from industry on leading and being part of that change.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Yes, I see Stephen has his hand up again. Sorry, yes. Next to you, Moses.
Okay, thanks. Steve Tolikin with Plastics News again. Really a two-part question to anybody. One, can you outline at all, are there areas of significant consensus you see and other areas of significant disagreement? Any comment on those? And then my second question deals with, this has come up in the plenaries, how do you evaluate to make sure that other materials have a better environmental impact, or at least don't have a worse one? You know, you can have paper cup packaging and you can coat that with a fluorinated forever chemical. No one's going to like that. So how does the treaty work to ensure that? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Maybe I'll let the chair answer the first part, but I think I can point you to the Zero Draft, which does talk about substances and alternatives that are developed with a precautionary principle, and that it doesn't create problems in the future. Of course, at the end of the day, the treaty is going to be negotiated by the member states, but I'm sure that principle will hopefully remain. Chair, you want to talk about convergence and divergence?
Yes, I think we have seen through submissions and other exchanges that there are probably some areas that are less controversial than others, no? It's difficult to say what specific, but I can say, for example, mention in the proposals related to waste management are really an area where everybody agrees that we need to have very strong measures and very improvement in what is happening right now in terms of how we are having processing plastic all over the world. So there are, I can mention, but I would like to highlight this as one of the areas where we have a lot of convergence.
Thank you very much. I think that's about all the time we have as well for today. So I'd like to thank our speakers and the members of the press for your time and attention. We will have a press release coming out on the opening day later this afternoon. And at 2:30 in this room, Greenpeace will have a press conference of their own. So please keep watching your email. We'll have media advisories through the week on anything else that's coming out in terms of press conferences. Thanks very much, everyone.